So, hello everybody, welcome to the Palais Dürkheim. I'm really pleased that I can introduce to you Lucia Santaella, who is a professor at Sao Paulo Catholic University, the director of the Center of Research in Digital Media and of the Center for Pearl Studies. She's one of the honorary presidents of the Latin American Federation of Semiotics, was the president of the Brazilian Semiotic Association, and is, among other functions, member of the advisory board of the Pearl Edition project in the United States. Lucia Santaella directed the Brazilian side of the Brazilian-German research project on word and image relations in the media and participated in many collaborative research projects on technical images, new technologies and sound grammars, or on the production and diffusion on scientific research in the digital era. She's been involved in a number of projects connected to Germany, was guest professor at Freie Universität Berlin, and is presently an associate member of the Interdisziplinäre Arbeitsgruppe für Kulturforschung at the Universität Kassel. So we are very happy to have you in Germany again and here in Weimar, and welcome, Lucia Santaella.
Thank you for the presentation. Good afternoon to everybody. It's a pleasure to be here and to be invited to this exciting event. Well, this title, Exo-Evolution, was the title of an exhibition in ZKM. This exhibition finished in last April, but it's not a copy, it's a coincidence, because I've been working with the idea of the human exo-evolution for years, more than 20 years, 21 years. Well, those are my research groups. The first one, Sociotramas, is on social nets. The other one is on realism. Not only it's on the new movement, which is called the ontology towards objects, speculative realism, and the third one is on Persian, Charles Peirce philosophy and semiotics. Unfortunately, they are all in Portuguese. We are beginning now to write in English because Portuguese nobody reads, not even the Brazilians. So, well, we are going to have several images. They are not just illustrations of my talk. They are complementary, but they have a life of their own. That means that they have their own signification, okay? Digital technology is an ingredient of contemporary culture without which science, art, work, education, politics, and economics, in sum, the whole range of social interaction and exchange, both national and international, have become unthinkable. What's going on the interface and symbiosis of humans and intelligent machines? And what do these developments mean to our social, cultural, and psychic life at the beginning of the 21st century? This is a question that has been at the top of the agenda of specialists in all the possible areas of knowledge and understanding. How can we comprehend the paroxysm of communicative exchange when the communicative exchange and sharing that occurs only in 1 minute, 60 seconds in the internet? I'm not going to read. We read in silence because there are so many numbers. 1 minute. These numbers were updated in 2013. I didn't care to update it to our day. 3 years ago. Therefore, WhatsApp has not entered the estimate. From the point of view of my specialization, which is on media, philosophy, and criticism, and on semiotics, my point of departure is similar to the one that Umberto Eco formulated already in 73, last century, 1973. That is, there is no culture without communication. Equally, there is no communication without science. Hence, what we exchange and share when we communicate are science, all and different kinds of science, not only verbal. So what I'm going to present is the semiotic hypothesis that I have been developing for decades. As far as we understand digital media, not only in the context of a mere change in the media, but also as a profound cultural revolution, the remodeling of the human body and the reconfiguration of the human mind and consciousness can no longer be denied. Confronted with this new reality, we find both the salvationists who believe that technology will be able to accomplish unprecedented feats, and on the other extreme, the apocalyptics who proclaim the death of nature and the dangers of dehumanization. Between such extreme positions, without denying the new cerebral and sensible order emerging from the hybridization of the organic with the synthetic, as for a long time I have been working with a semiotic hypothesis to enable the understanding of the continuous growth in the exchange and sharing of messages, which from now on I will call science. Messages are made of science, not only verbal science, but also visual, body, sound science, and all their hybrid forms. With the consequent growth of the human individual brain into a huge collective brain outside the biological body. For this indisputable expansion to occur, the means of communication, exchange, and sharing of science have played a fundamental role since time immemorial. Well, the picture that they put in the program is another version of this metaphor. Looking for an expansion of our mental horizons and trying to embrace a more broad-ranging viewpoint to include semiotics, history, anthropology, philosophy, and even biological evolution, instead of the philosophically vague ideas of simulacra and degeneration of reality caused by the media. You can see that I'm not Baudrillardian. The notion of semiotic mediation is able to function as an anthropological, historical rainbow to demonstrate that every relation of human beings to nature has always been mediated by the exchange of science in culture. The present status of our cyber minds and bodies is the result of a long and gradual process which began when humans arose to the condition of the Homo erectus, that gesticulates and speaks. Ever since humans were constituted as such, biological and technical orders have evolved in symbiosis. During the evolution of Homo sapiens sapiens, there has been a permanent growth of the human brain outside of the human body. And the human ecosphere has become more and more intelligent, full of science, culturally marked. In short, it has become a semiosphere. Others call it infosphere, but I prefer the term semiosphere, which was created by Lotman, the Russian semiotician. Since the notion of sign is much more objective than the vague notion of information. The remarkable advances a long time in the evolution of the semiosphere, that is, in the growth of science and media, have brought as one of its consequences the gradual and increasing complexity of the techno and the semio-diversity of communication and culture. This genetic and symbolic heritage of culture is the reason why semiotics, especially in its branches of bio and cybersemiotics, has more and more provided us with the necessary means of questioning the dualistic division, traditional dualistic division between nature and culture. In the light of semiosis, understood as the growth and continuity of science, the sharp boundary between the natural and the cultural world fade away. In the second decade of the 21st century, when the frontiers between the external environment of mediation and technology and the internal environment of perception, organization, and modeling are moving in the direction of a radical abolition, this biosemiotic notion of Umwelt may serve as a key to the understanding of the inseparable link of technology, culture, and the semiosphere with nature and the biosphere in general. As we know, Umwelt, a concept that was developed by the German biologist Jakob von Uexküll, does not refer merely to the physical and biological environment of an organism, but also to its subjective world, which consists of its specific, adaptive, perceptual field. Hence, only the perceptual and operational ingredients of the environment are able to form a meaningful Umwelt for the survival of the organism and consequently for a community of subjects. Let's go to my second topic, the exosomatic growth of science through the media. From a semiotic point of view, culture is mediation. Where there is life, there is also intelligence, systems of codification, and ultimately culture, since life can only be explained in terms of intelligence, which is another name for mediation. The difference between nature and culture cannot be stated as a naive dualism, but must be conceived of in a gradation that departs from the most rudimentary forms which are manifested in the symbolic capacity of our species. One of the features of complex systems is their tendency to growth and proliferation. In the human brain, it has been the neocortex, the cerebral nest of the symbolic order, with its most sophisticated forms of mediation and optimized complexity, which has been the locus of continuous growth. Due to anatomical and neurological limitations, the human brain cannot stop growing. It's just like life, cannot stop growing and cannot grow within the skull, the symbolic capacity, hence is bound to grow outside the human body, namely in the form of media and science. This kind of growth has been the source of the exosomatization of the human senses and brain. The exosomatization materializes itself in the semiospheric multiplicity and multiplication which has been dominating more and more the biosphere. The neocortex began to evolve parallel with the emergence of spoken language, collective thought, society, and culture. The specifically human manual dexterity soon found its extension in gestures and corporeal paintings, in the first artifacts destined to improve the chances of survival, in architecture and the production of clothes and other artifacts. All of these became evidence of how the human intellect imprints itself on nature. Through gesture and speech, and through the semiotic derivations of language, such as writing, drawing, or painting, the human brain extended itself from the interior to the exterior of the human body, therefore increasing our sensorial and intellectual capacity. The appearance of the exosomatic means of preserving human memory had consequences which were neither few nor trivial. Timidly at first, today with no restrictions, mankind began to populate the planet with 2- and 3-dimensional images and with writings which are themselves nothing other than a certain type of image. On leaving the brain, these images, whether figures or writings, needed external and material substrates on which they could be set down so as to last in time. In the case of 2-dimensional images, on stone, bone, metal, walls, clay, wood, leather, papyrus, cloth, or paper, the progression from stone to cloth and paper demonstrates an increasing change from a fixed support on a wall, for instance, on a stone, from a fixed support to one that can be carried around. Whereas access to fixed supports presuppose the receptor's obligation to go to the source, portable substrates could be moved around in space. This, in turn, involved the reconciliation of durability with mobility. This incredible image in the last documenta, necessary for the circulation of images and information. When memory was extended to outside the body, the external images necessarily produced modifications in the means of production, transmission, and reception of the messages. Thus, the hand, connected with certain of the body's motor abilities, took the role of mediator between the imaginative and cognitive faculties of the brain and a given support on which the signs were to be stored. To carry out this function, the hand in turn required an extension in the form of tools capable of making the inscriptions on the material support. However varied these tools, they are always extensions of the hand. We are not losing the hand. Thus, hand, and that is one of the chapters in Flusser's book about the hand, and I wrote about it in Flusseriana, which is a huge kind of dictionary in 3 languages that has been produced in 3 languages, Portuguese, English, and German. And I wrote about this subject, hand. The hand and tools came to work together as means of production, extensions of the brain, leaving in the outside world marks of mankind's symbolic capacity. The channel of, or means of transmission, which in speech was in the body. When we speak, we have everything in our body, and you listen with everything that is in the body. But here, the channel or means of transmission, which in speech was in the body, now moves to the external vehicles, while the eye, as the encoding and decoding organ, and the act of gazing as definer of intentionality and purpose of vision, come to exercise the function of means of reception. Signs began to diversify in the outside world, including sculptures, drawings, paintings, and written language stored on specific supports such as books. From their most rudimentary and primitive forms, they began to demand means of conservation. Storage and conservation necessarily go together. So there arose temples, libraries, museums. The impact of oil paint, when first used during the Renaissance, was not accidental. The gradual addition of oily matter to tempera for painting on wood led to oil colors with better handling potential and greater flexibility. This in turn allowed the possibility of using cloth, nearly always linen, as substrate. Oil on cloth, less liable to degradation, allowed an alliance between the light and portable nature of a picture and the need for its conservation in museums. This fact is that the fact is that signs are fated to increasing proliferations. An important demonstration of this fact was the invention of the printing press, thanks to the Germans, the forerunner of what McLuhan made known as the Gutenberg Galaxy. The means of production now comes in itself to be a means of reproduction. An enormous number of copies can be made from a single matrix. With the printed book, we arrive at the primordial of the processes of mass communication, which made it possible for an increasingly wide public to receive verbal, visual, and sound information. The principle of the printing press underlies the process of engraving, in which the support acts as a reproductive matrix and allows multiplication of other supports. Rudimentary processes of reproduction had existed since the times of the Greeks. This is a passage that I took from Benjamin, another German. A long time before the printing press allowed the multiplication of writing, in the Middle Ages, copper and the aquatint appeared as alternatives to wood. Even so, it was only at the beginning of the 19th century that reproductive techniques made a decisive step forward in the form of lithography. The use of a stone block for printing, rather than carving a drawing on wood or engraving it on metal, for the first time allowed the graphic arts to get into the business of reproduction in series and to produce new works day by day. In illustrating the realities of daily life, drawing became the intimate collaborator of the printing press, according to Benjamin. A similar form of analysis can be applied to music. Also in music, the invention of forms of notation, of written music, relieved the brain's memory of a storage overload. We owe the history and development of tonal music to the invention of forms of notation. And music, like the image, sought for means whereby sound could be reproduced, so that the evanescence of sounds might be given longer life on durable supports. The great leap occurred, however, with the change from art crafts, in which body and hand still reigned supreme, to the industrial and mechanical world. Now there appeared machines with rudimentary intelligence, which were themselves capable of producing signs, a function hitherto the exclusive privilege of the mind. The first of these machines, the forerunner of what would come to be more properly known as technological media, was the photographic and film camera, which appeared in parallel with the typewriter and the gramophone, as this was acutely discussed by Hitler, another German. I'm becoming suspect. What we have in these, they are brilliant, what can I do? What we have in these machines is nothing more than reproductive automation. Here, the means of storage, an extension of the brain memory, has a reproductive nature which fulfills the function of intensifying the exchange of signs or messages. Photography has properties in common with these forms of reproduction. Yet it was to introduce some revolutionary novelties. By comparison with the past, perhaps the most surprising of these was that it led to the appearance of machines endowed with some form of intelligence. What I'm saying here is that a photographic machine has already some kind of intelligence. a sensorial intelligence. One great impact of the new technologies is surely that in extending the symbolic capacity of the brain to the outside world, it allows the growth of the brain potentialities outside the human body. There is a tendency to consider computers as the first machine to incorporate intelligence. In my view, the camera already introduced automated sensorial intelligence before them. Now, let's go to the problem of intelligent machines and the hyperbrain. As far as optics go, the problem of photography was resolved in the time of the Renaissance, with the code of Perspectiva Artificialis, which completed the corrected the camera obscura. All that was missing was to discover a way of fixing the luminous reflection projected on the inner wall of the camera obscura. The discovery of certain silver compounds were light sensitive at the beginning of the 19th century brought a solution to this problem and represented the second great decisive step in the invention of photography. As we can see, a certain visual intelligence with regard to the working of the eye and the fixing of the reflections of light, and also a certain intelligence able to represent and imitate the three-dimensional nature of vision on a flat surface, both became automatic through the camera. For this reason, the photographic act is much more than just pressing a button. In the act, there must necessarily be a dialogue, a clash between the automated visual intelligence of the machine and the sensitive intelligence of the photographer. Here I'm again going to Flusser. What's most important in all this that may explain the powerful impact of photography is that here began the great adventure of extending in more or less intelligent machines the human brain's capacity to produce signs. From there on, nothing could hold back the acceleration of the growth of science, of the expansion of the semiosphere. The appearance of photography coincided with the automation of printing. Faster reproduction of printing allied with the telegraph allowed the long-distance transmission of news. The addition of photography with its documentary vocation added up to an unbeatable combination. This led to the explosive impact of the newspaper, modern man's form of morning prayer. Hegel, again, German, oh God. Newspaper and photography, these were the forerunners of mass culture. They were accompanied by the multiplication of books, which were made possible the popular novel and the advent of women as readers. Popular novels and were followed by the cinema as a form of mass entertainment. Therefore, the continuous process of proliferation of the semiosphere came to find a stupendous ally in the electronic media. In the mechanical phase of photography and cinema, the reproductive capacity was still separate from the productive capacity. That's to say, there was a separation between the act of taking a photograph or filming and the act of copying, and yet another separation with relation to the process of reception, three phases. With the advent of television, these acts and processes became simultaneous. They gave rise to the phenomenon of synchronicity uniting all the elements which take part in the semiotic process: production, copying, reproduction, not reproduction anymore, but diffusion, and then reception, all together. They represent a further advance in the means of conservation and preservation of science, both as regards to, the economy of space occupied by these media and as regards their durability. Even so, very soon, the amount of information which could be stored on tapes would seem too small by comparison with the potential of computer technologies and their numerical codes. Indeed, with the new information technologies, or better, technologies of intelligence, this is the name that Pierre Levy gave to it very soon, in 1993, a new and revolutionary threshold began to take shape on the human horizon, since we are no longer dealing simply with an extension of mankind's visual and sensory capacity, as was the case with the mechanical and even the electronic world. What we have now is the extension outside the human body of some of the properties of the brain, and also for the first time, the possibility of long-distance, collective, interactive communication in sharing of science. After all, what are the global networks to which any individual can be hooked up but gigantic brains, sources of inexhaustible competences and knowledge which are available for selective share by individuals and entire communities? Here I am quoting Shaviro, Stephen Shaviro. He's an American who has written a wonderful book about life in the internet. While the visual and acoustic machines, such as photography, film, cinema, sound recorder, or television, extended our sensorial intelligence and flooded the world with images and sounds, the present intelligent telematic machines are hyper-brain processors, which are able to turn all forms of writing, sounds, voices, and videos into electronic impulses and process them in complex, hypermediatic syntaxes. This is the page, one page of the internet. In fact, which is used here for political purposes. In fact, the human brain has grown to such a degree outside of the skull that our species had to develop hyperbrain processors to accomplish tasks of retention, retrieval, and transformation of data, which in our age have come to the point of terabytes that are treated by big data algorithms. So, the last topic, a biotech evolutionary leap. In his book, The Evolution of the Modern Mind, Merlin Donald, who is a Canadian, develops his thesis that the proliferation of writing and image production, culminating in the mediatic hyperproduction of audiovisual science and in the more recent telematic technologies, constitute the third biological evolutionary leap of the sapiens sapiens. Whichever these technologies may be, phonic devices, drawing instruments, photographic machines, film, video, holography, computers, smartphones, telematic webs, they are all more or less complex prostheses which not only amplify the senses of our bodies, but also reproduce and process signs which increase the memory and cognitive capacities of our brains, intensifying and expanding our ability to communicate, interact, exchange, and share science, ideas, and knowledge. After having peopled the Earth's surface with more and more complex offsprings of the intellect, it was in the sky that the human body and mind began to locate their new extensions. Kirchhoff, also Canadian, has argued that the human skin has begun to acquire a global extension. Our skin is not here in our body anymore. It's in the planet. Such extension is due to the poly-hyperlocalization of the human body, resulting from the extrasomatic growth of our brain. Signs are now migrating to the sky by means of satellite devices. As I have argued elsewhere, the most sophisticated and almost autonomous organs of vision, I developed a semiotic analysis of these kinds of images, are now surrounding the planet. In this way, our eyes have grown to an astronomical dimension, since our globe can now be perceived in the form of pictures coming from remote satellite cameras. However, the dimensions of our perceptual organs do not stop at the limits of the globe. They advance by means of radio astronomical antennas, which make our ears acquainted with even more remote stellar noises. At the same time, the computer allows us to represent the intergalactic events and stellar trajectories which are being registered through powerful, more and more powerful telescopes. This gives us access to a whole new universe, of which until recently we only had a mathematical and speculative representation. This is a planet, new planet that was, well, Jupiter became very, timid if we compare to this planet. Well, no less impressive than these macroscopic sensorial devices giving us access to our cosmos are the microscopic means which give us access to the interior of our body through magnetic resonance, scanner, laparoscopy, tomography, echography, angiography, artificial colorization. The remotest recesses of the body can now be revealed, turned inside out. Many artists began to explore this new dimension since the 50s, when the first, instruments to see the interior of the body began to be explored. No less impressive, through magnetic resonance, I said that already. There are still other kinds of microscopic and even nanoscopic investigation and manipulation. For instance, they are used now for cosmetics, for our women's luck. such as the one which is developed by means of biotechnology, bioengineering, bio-nanotechnology, which advance towards the basic stuff of life, the genetically codified elements of life. Another form of investigation takes place by means of computer simulation in artificial life. Anything may be simulated by computers, not only many of our brain operations, but also our hormone system, noise, and the redundancies of the biological phenomena. Even tactile, thermal, or olfactory, synesthetic, and sensory motor information can be simulated. In sum, life itself can be simulated, and all the ethical problems that this brings, giving birth to a dry kind of life, replicating in silicon the humid, carbon forms of life, and very fragile, the carbon form of life. To what extent may these aseptic replicas be still called life has been the subject of much debate. And there is a paper by Emmeke, who is a Danish philosopher of biology, he discusses this problem brilliantly. Next to artificial life, through computer simulation, there is virtual reality, mixed reality, augmented reality, the plurisensorial mix, which until now has only restricted to processes within the brain, can now be realized in projections on screens of multi and hypermedia outside the human brain. Hence, our cognitive dimensions are extended to the sensory, motor, and polysensorial levels, resulting in the expansive involvement of our body in a global synesthetic cycle, sensoriality, and with mixed and augmented reality in a seamless mixture of physical and virtual experience. In sum, if we understand by media in general, each and every means of communication and exchange, the first media in the history of culture were the human speech organs. They're still here. They are not dead. The evolution of language gave rise to the development of the diversity of exosomatic means of sign production. In the history of culture, every new medium has given rise to changes in its social and cultural environment. But the advent of a new environment has never caused the complete disappearance of the previous one. This is very important to understand what's happening in the hyper-complexity of our culture. The other forms of levels and forms, historical forms of culture, have not disappeared. They are still here present, but with new functions. On the contrary, history has shown that the means of exchanging and sharing signs are cumulative and complementary. Communication media and the cultural environments they created, from archaic and ancient oral culture to literate and then press culture, from these to modern mass culture, postmodern media culture, and finally to contemporary digital culture, all of them coexist and synchronize nowadays in the constitution of a dense, hybrid, and hyper-complex semiotic web. Which are the scope? Here I finish. Which are the scope, the aim, the prospects, and the future of this amazing and disconcerting human adventure? The question is unavoidable. However, as I do not have any talent for prophecies, I will not conjecture any answer. What I can say is that at present, we are witnessing a huge conflict between the compulsion and fate of life and intelligence to grow on the one side, and on the other side, the pantagruelic perversity of capitalism, which is putting into high risk the survival of our other and our species in the planet. This once beautiful planet. Thank you very much. Okay.
So now we'll have discussion of the paper. We don't have that much time left, but at least...
I'm so sorry.
No problem, at least for some questions. I didn't introduce myself in the beginning, so I'll just do that right now. I'm Krtilova in German, and I'm the researcher and coordinator of research institute housed in this building. No problem. It's the media. The technology is everywhere. Which is called Kompetenzzentrum Medienanthropologie, the Competence Center for Media Anthropology. So this is the right place where we should discuss these topics that have been brought up in the discussions earlier already, not talking explicitly about technology, but when we talk about sharing economy and new models, obviously there's the problem of that these models are enabled by technologies. They wouldn't be possible without the technology. I would have many questions for you, Lucia, but let me just, because it seems to be an important term for you, to ask you about...
I'm not performing.
About the notion of evolution and the evolutionary model that you presented. Because when I put it simply, there are two competing models of media history, and that would be the evolutionary model and the model dealing more with ruptures and revolutions, and stating that history is not a development, but history is completely discontinuous, and all narratives are just projected onto facts that are completely separate. And from this viewpoint, in Weimar, there have been several colleagues developing this viewpoint. Each medium co-produces its own history and a different historiography. So our history is bound to writing, to speech, so narrating, and recording this narration. This is put in a very simple way, but it's really dependent on this technology, on this cultural technique of writing. That's why we have history. You know it, obviously, from Wilhelm Flusser, this model. He combines these two models, the evolutionary and this revolutionary, we may say so, model, telling a story, first of all, about the human abstracting from the world. In the beginning, he's embedded in a live world of 4 dimensions, then there are 3 dimensions, we are grasping objects, then we have 2 dimensions, images, 1 dimension, the text, and then comes the 0 dimension. But there comes the rupture. Because when we stop writing, when we jump out of the universe of the text, we stop having any history. So in the universe of the computer, in the zero-dimensional universe, we cannot narrate any stories anymore, or we cannot grasp the world with stories, or with narrating a development, narrating something has happened until now and why. All these explanations are all in vain, because now we have to think in a completely different way, which, as you have shown on the beautiful slide with all the numbers, is maybe completely not human anymore. because everything you've shown, all these clicks per second and so on, it's not a human scale. It's something only the computer can calculate. And we couldn't even imagine not having a computer collecting this data and making any sense of this data, because we would have to have thousands of scientists, thousands of mathematicians, and it would just not be possible. So I wanted to ask you if you would integrate in your evolutionary model this kind of a rupture with the computer technology, and maybe even hinting on all the post-human theories, that it's maybe we're just jumping out of the paradigm of the human and facing an intelligence that's not human anymore. So that artificial intelligence is not modeled according to human intelligence, not just better than human, but it's completely different. It's an intelligence, but different.
Many questions. Oh, I'll try to take the main points of your question. Well, what you asked is what is being debated nowadays. Well, I don't think that this paradigm of ruptures goes against what I presented. Because if we adopt a rupture as a complete discontinuation, we are reinventing the wheel every time. We are not. Of course, every new media creates new environments. This is in McLuhan. They create new environments, but in my point of view, the other environments do not die. There is a refunctionalization of the other environments which came previously. So, okay, there are different modes of evolution. For instance, if you take science, the book by Kuhn, New Paradigms, there are ruptures, but not complete discontinuity. The Newton paradigms is still true, but it's partial, it's limited, but not that. The same thing happens with other aspects of the scientific evolution. But the art evolution is completely different because there is no rupture. And then if we take the philosophical evolution also, you cannot, for instance, you cannot say that with Hegel, Kant has died. So there are different kinds of evolution, but not complete discontinuity. I don't agree with that. And what I showed is that there are changes, sometimes dramatic changes, but not complete discontinuity. As I am a Persian philosopher, I don't dare to say that I'm a philosopher. But, okay, I'm a specialist in Peirce. And for Peirce, he says, you are either tout court evolutionist or none. So I'm an evolutionist tout court. And I think that we have to come to a complementary view of continuity and rupture. Both act together. But what I defend that the humankind has a history, what I called an anthropological rainbow, which is the only way that we can have to understand what is happening today. So I do not believe that the human being is disappearing or that the human being doesn't exist anymore, which is one of the narratives of post-human. I don't agree with that. So I wrote a whole article on zero-dimensionality. And I don't believe that with zero-dimensionality we have lost the other dimensions. They are still working. So I think that this prejudice against, when the computer appeared, I used to say, you know why we have prejudice against the computer? Because the computer is an hyper-ego. So it's still, you know, the Cartesian paradigm is so powerful, still so powerful, despite Nietzsche, despite Freud, despite Marx. The Cartesian paradigm is still very, very powerful because it gives us a robust idea of our ego. Now we have to understand that our ego is something very insignificant, because when we think that the human being is disappearing, it's because we are still very connected to an idea of the old idea of philosophy of humanity, which is based on individualistic criteria. That's what I think.
Okay, thank you very much. And unfortunately, we've run out of time, but still, I think if someone has a short question, we could still bring it in, because I think 5-10 more minutes wouldn't matter. So is there a question from your side? It's all too much, I guess. Okay.
I think she has a question.
Practical one. Can you please come closer to the microphone? It's really like practical one, adding to the dimensions. Like, what do we do with the old information of the other dimensions we used to store? Lots of information there, and then we are jumping into this zero dimension with a different language. What's happening with all our old books, our knowledge? Where do we put it? Because I was
Don't
really
you
triggered
read
also
in
by
Kindle?
Sorry?
Don't you read in the computer, in Kindle?
Well,
So
I was triggered because of I worked with storing of information, and this is a big dilemma actually everywhere,
yeah, I know,
everywhere, because you
I know.
cannot transfer, right? This is, and then we lose maybe or other dimensions, and maybe we would just jump into this zero dimension, and everybody's just scared.
We are scared because it's more, the world is developing in such an acceleration that goes beyond our capacity to understand. I think so. So there is a lot of debate about that. And I've been working about this new paradox, the paradox of conservation of this new media, digital media, for the despair of the artists. They produced something 5 years ago, and today this is not working anymore. So this is a big paradox. So I think that what's happening now in our life as human beings is full of paradoxes, is full of ambivalence. For instance, at the same time that we can, well, this was the person who works for, you know, he repairs things in my house. He was calling me. At the same time that we can connect with the whole world, something very prosaic, with the whole world, at the same time we are submitted to terrible surveillance. So we are living in a time of pure contradiction, paradoxes, ambivalence, but they are inside us. If we read Freud, we are going to find that out.
Okay, so thanks very much again, Lucia, Santaella.